In this video, I'll be showing you how to make these tassel earrings. I used embroidery floss, but you could also use thin cotton yarn, and they were super quick and easy to whip up. This video was suggested by Bruna, so thanks for the idea, Bruna. Now let's get started. For this project, I used 3 different colours of embroidery thread, or you could also use thin cotton yarn. I used a piece of cardboard, a pair of scissors and a darning needle, as well as a bit of super glue. The cardboard can be any cardboard that you have lying around the house, and just cut it into a strip of the length that you want your tassel to be. And for me, that was about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. First, you're going to need to cut a piece of floss that's around 4 times the length of your tassel. So for me, that was around 4 inches. And this is going to be what we use to secure our tassel. Then you're going to lie it out across the top of your piece of cardboard and grab the rest of your thread, and we're going to start wrapping it around the piece of cardboard. Make sure that you leave a little bit extra hanging off the end, and we can trim that later. So now you're going to wrap the thread around the piece of cardboard 25 times, or until you have made your tassel as thick as you want it to be. For me, I'm just using standard embroidery floss that is 6 threads thick, and I found that 25 wraps was about the right size, but you could go a little bit more, a little bit less. Or if you want to make a really puffy tassel, just do some more wraps. Once you've wrapped the thread around 25 times, you're going to grab the 2 ends of that first 4-inch piece that we cut and give a little wriggle to make sure it's right at the top of the tassel, although this doesn't matter too much, I found out later. And we're just going to tie it in a couple of knots to secure it. You want to pull this as tight as you can because it's going to be what's holding the tassel together, and making sure that if you pull on one of the strings, it's not all going to slide off. Then you need to get the tassel off the piece of cardboard. I would recommend doing it closer to the edge, and as you'll see here in a second, I cut the edge off so that I don't have as far to move it. But if you have a smaller piece of cardboard, this won't be an issue for you. So now you want to tug the knot as hard as you can, and then tie a couple of other knots to secure it. Once you've done that, you'll need to hold your tassel by the tie pieces and cut your tassels in half so that you won't have loops at the bottom, you'll have frayed edges. You also don't have to do this all in one go, so it doesn't matter if you miss any, you can just get them afterwards. I am now going to cut the piece of yarn that's connecting my tassel to the ball of yarn. I feel like I keep using floss, thread and yarn interchangeably. Sorry, I just mean the same thing every time. So now you're going to need to wrap that free piece of yarn that we used to tie a knot around the top of the tassel to hold it in that sort of tassel shape. Otherwise it will just sort of flop anywhere like a pom-pom. So you need to wrap it around a couple of times, and then we're going to insert the end into a darning needle and push it through itself to secure. So I'm just checking the size with my other tassels. If this is your first one, you don't need to do that, but if it's your second or third, it's a good idea to check that they're all about even. So now that I've wrapped it around a few times and I have a small tail, I'm going to grab my darning needle, and I'm going to stick the darning needle through the top of the tassel past the bit that I've wrapped around. So you can sort of see there, that's where I've started wrapping. So I'm going to go just to the left of that. I'm going to insert my darning needle and put the end of the wrapping floss into the end of the needle, and we're going to pull it through and pull it tight to secure the tassel. And pull it through. Now I'm going to grab my super glue and put a little dollop on where we pulled that piece of string through, just to make sure that it's nice and secure and it doesn't come apart. This is optional, you don't have to do it, and you could also use a different kind of glue if you don't have any super glue, but super glue is generally very cheap, so hopefully you're able to get your hands on some. And now we're going to cut off all those little scragglers hanging off the bottom. This will just make it even, and you can do any more trimming. If you made it a little bit too long, you could trim it shorter here. So I would always err on the side of making it a little bit longer than you want if you're not quite sure. This part is totally optional, but if you want to, you can try to separate the strands of your embroidery floss to make it a bit more fluffy. Depends if you like the stringy yarny look or if you like the more fluffy look. So just try to separate those strands if that's what you want to do. And that's our tassel. It's pretty easy and quick, and we're just going to need to make 5 more if you're doing 3 tassels per earring, but you could do as many tassels or as few tassels as you want per earring. So just make as many as you need to make, and then I will show you how to attach them all together to make them in the formation of the example earring. And now I'm going to go ahead and make the rest of my tassels. Once you've finished your tassels, you will need to decide what order you want them to be in. So I had a little look at my example earring and I worked out what order I wanted the colours to go. Once you decide on an order, you will need to grab the floss that you used for the top tassel. So whatever tassel is going to be at the top that you're attaching to the earring, you're going to need to grab that coloured floss, and we're going to attach them all together. So you're going to need to cut a piece that's approximately 4 times as long as the tassel, so doubled over. So once it's doubled over, it'll be approximately twice as long as the tassel, and we're going to cut the ends off, so it doesn't matter if you make it too long. So you're going to grab your floss and insert it through the head of the shepherd's hook earring that you're using, or any other kind of earring that you have. And then I'm going to put each end of the thread into the darning needles. I'm using 2 darning needles for this because I thought it would be a bit easier, but it kind of didn't really matter in the end. So if you only have 1, don't worry, you're not going to be disadvantaged. So just put the needles on the end of the floss. Then you want to make sure that it's not twisted, and we're going to insert the darning needles into the top of that first tassel. So you're going to grab 1 needle and insert it into one side of the top of the tassel. This is very similar to where we inserted the needle when we secured off that tail that we wrapped around the top of the tassel. So basically the same thing, you're going to put one side of the floss in one side of the tassel and the other side on the other side of the tassel, so that there's kind of a loop going across the top of it. And that's what's going to secure your earring to the top of your tassel. So then you give it a tug, pull it tight, and your earring should sit on top of your first tassel. Once you've got your earring hook in place, you're going to need to tie a couple of knots just to secure it in place to make sure that it doesn't slide down the floss. I think I just tied 2 knots. Yeah, I just tied 2 knots to secure it in place. So now we're going to do basically the same thing. Put the ends of the floss back onto the 2 darning needles, or one at a time, whichever you have been doing. And we're going to do the exact same thing by inserting it into the top of the next tassel. So I'm doing the lightest blue one next, and I'm going to insert both of my darning needles, one into each side of the top of the tassel, and give it a pull. But you won't need to pull this one as tight as we pulled the top one, because we're not trying to get it all the way to the top. You want to position this tassel sort of halfway down so that the top of the tassel is about halfway down the tassel strings of the top one, so that it's kind of covering the top of the tassel but not covering it completely, because you still want to be able to see the colour but you don't want to be able to see the top. So just like this, pull it into a position that you're happy with, and then we're going to tie a couple of knots again. So just tie a couple of knots to secure it in place, but this time you want to make sure that you're not yanking your knots too hard, or at least not the first one, because you don't want the tassel to move. It's not a big deal if it does. You can just loosen the knot a bit and move the tassel back, but tie it in a couple of knots. And I'm also just making sure that none of my tassel strings are getting caught up in the knots either. Once you're happy with the positioning of your first two tassels, we're then going to do the exact same thing and add the third. So now just insert the needles again and push them through the top of that third and final tassel, just like we did for the other two tassels. And this one is going to be exactly the same as the second tassel, in that we need to position it the same distance from the first one to the second one. The same distance needs to be from the second one to the third one, just to make it look even. And then we're going to tie those knots and finish off this third tassel. And once you've finished tying off this third tassel, you've finished your earring. All we're going to need to do is to cut those tail ends off the piece of yarn that we've been using to tie all three of the tassels together, and then you're finished, unless you wanted to separate all your strands. You could do that now. It doesn't really matter when in the process you do it. Probably a bit easier to do it before you attach them all together, but it's totally doable now. So now that's your earring. It's all finished. It was pretty quick and easy. You could definitely do it all in one sitting. And then obviously it's not exactly the same as the original one that I was kind of using for inspiration, but I also am making it by hand, so I wasn't expecting it to look the same. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments and I will get back to you. If you make any of my projects, please tag me on Instagram at stephtashi_handmade.